What's up, everyone? My name is Matthew Dale. I am here to help you play better, sound great, and understand more. And I wanted to walk you through a preset in my FM9 that I've been using a lot of recently. This is my teaching rig, my teaching preset. And I'm basically just running the same exact signal chain on both of these rows here, input 1 and input 2 for my guitar and then my student's guitar. And then with this particular rig, I'm just running to output 1. That way I just have one control on this. You could run separate outputs, and you could also use this same sort of framework if you are running multiple instruments at one time through your FM9. Nothing really too complex going on here, but I wanted to walk you through a couple of my own tips and tricks for doing something like this. So first, let's actually just talk about the routing. You can see I'm in input 1 here, and my signal is active. If I just pull up my preset leveling tool, we can see that I'm hovering right around just under that red line. That's where I like to level my presets. And this is going through this basic amp, cab, and drive chain. I've got a little bit of a studio compressor on the back end. This is just one of my tricks that I really like doing. If you download my block library, if you want to download some of my favorite tones for yourself for free, head over to matthewdale.com/blocks. And this is studio feedback compressor. You can see this in my block library here as light post. So you can see this is the exact thing that I'm using on the back end of my amplifiers. And all it's really doing is just giving us this next level of studio quality guitar signal. So here's without. You can see when I play light on such a clean amplifier, my stuff kind of goes away. But if I engage this compressor, not only is it just giving me a little bit of a lift, that's still roughly the same amount of dynamics that I'm playing. So that's just helping to even out those playing dynamics on the back end of the amp and cab chain. A lot of times when people say that, they aren't really getting great clean tones out of the Fractal, this is like my go-to. This first, or you could also do this in the dynamics page of the amp block as well. It's a little bit different since this is kind of like doing, a studio feedback compressor type thing. It's adding a little bit of that character there. You could also do the output compressor, or my favorite, the gain enhancer type on here works really well for that as well. Now, if we just quickly look at everything, so I've got the Shiva clean on both of these guys here, the same cabinets, the same compressor, all of this same stuff is happening. And you'll notice that input 2 is muted. That way, as people are coming in and out of your lesson room or something, and they are unplugging and plugging back in, I've got that switch on my foot control right here. So I can mute my student, they can unplug and plug in without any pops or any sort of detrimental noise that would, affect you or your equipment. So that is a really nice, handy feature there. It also is really good if they are chronic noodlers and you're trying to explain something to your student and they are just noodling along. You can just mute them out and say, pay attention, please. Something you might want to keep in mind real quick too, since we're utilizing output 1 here, you might want to map one of these level controls. This is row 1, 2, 3, 4. The student's chain is row 4. You might want to go over to your perform page and take row 4 and put it somewhere on your per preset performance control. That way, if your student has a little bit of a hotter guitar or a weaker guitar, you can kind of boost or attenuate this level as needed. I might call this, student level, just so it's nice and easy. Let's actually get into some of the tones, some of the meat and potatoes. I believe that my Klon setting is going to be staying on throughout all of these amp changes, and it's really giving me just a nice lift. This is really using the Klon as a clean boost. I have this on independent switches. I'll talk about the switches down here on the FM9 itself in a little bit, but I've got independent ones. So I've got one for me and one for my student. That way, if we're practicing improvising or soloing, I can boost one person up and then take one person down. I have these right next to each other too. So if you want to like click them both on, or one and then swap the two, if I can get it under my shoe here without looking. If I hit both of them, I can swap the two and, you know, do some fancy stuff like that if I wanted to. I've also got a little delay that is copied over here. Just to add a little bit of nuance, if we're doing something a little more atmospheric, it's set up to a dotted eighth delay, and I can tap in that tempo if I want as well. Otherwise, I'm just doing a really subtle medium room. Nothing too crazy going on here as well. These are just set up in series, which does definitely work. Let's actually talk about the amp tones. I've got different amp tones on each of these chains set up under my scenes here, and the scenes I have on a switch is just going to rotate the amp tones around, the scenes around. So here's clean. This is accomplished by the Bogner Shiva. Very clean platform. This is great just for, you know, plug in and start the lesson. And if you're doing something like triads, you don't need necessarily something that's high gain. If we get into some more character tones, I've got my go-to AC20. And then, of course, use the bridge pickup. Boost it with the clon. This one's really great because it's super versatile under your fingers. That's clean, and then drive and bridge pickup. Just with a drive pedal and proper pickup selection there. If you want something that's a little more modern and a little bit tighter, I've got the PRS Archon, or the Archaean as it's listed here. So this one's just a little bit more modern sounding of high gain. Well, I wouldn't really call it high gain, I guess. It's more a higher mid gain, but I like how sort of concise that tonal pattern is. When I'm on the bridge pickup, it's very tight, and there's a lot of good low mid, and then mid. Good for power chords and that sort of thing. Let's hit that with the clon and put a little delay on too. So it's good for that sort of thing too. Next up, now I do have a high gain. This is the Rev Gen Red 1 amp model in here, and it absolutely screams. And that's fun for that sort of thing. That one is a little bit louder, but, you know, you can make a little bit of noise in a lesson. I think that's fine. Real quick, while we're talking about the amp tones, if you want a really quick way to actually, like, copy all of your block settings from one chain to the next, we can actually copy and paste entire blocks. So I went ahead and I reset a lot of the parameters in my second amp block. You can see I've got Herbie Mark III and some Carol and some different amp tones going on here. But if I just go up to amp block number 1 and I go to edit and I say copy block, this will actually copy. Let's go to edit and paste block. This will basically recreate my exact amp block number 1 over here. So now I've got my Shiva again with all the right settings. and everything else. So that can be a really big time saver, especially if you've gone in and done some other work in some of the other advanced parameters of our amp block. And of course, we can do this with all of the other blocks on our grid. Let's actually just go over to the way that I have all these switches laid out. I am using my custom effects layout, and you can see over here, this is my scene cycle switch. So as I go through, we can see this update. This is the clean amp, the Shiva. This is the AC20. This is the Archon, and this is the Rev. And that way, if we're just working on some songs or working on some parts or working on just one concise thing, this isn't a performance preset per se. I just want to get sort of the amp tone that we need for that moment and then go from there. And it updates both of those. If I go back over here, it updates both of these amp blocks. So I can cycle through all these amp blocks. Of course, the FM9 now has gapless switching from channel to channel. So that is also a nice benefit as well. If I go from clean to AC, to all those different amp tones. So you can definitely use this sort of method, maybe with a different switch layout for performance and running two instruments at the same time in a playing environment. Here's those two driving controls over here. There are the two delay controls, so delay 1 and 2. I've got two independent reverb controls as well if I wanted to shut the reverb off on each independent chain, and then my student on and off button is over here as well. Before we end, let's just talk a little bit about some boring stuff on this setup. You do want to make sure that input 1 is kind of self-explanatory. That's what we're using most of the time anyway. But input 2, this is where I'm having my student plug in. I'm sourcing from the analog signal. That's the physical signal on the device, not the USB signal or anything. And I have it set to left only, so they need to plug into the left side of input 2. And then since I'm going into an FRFR in my teaching room, I just have this hooked up. You could leave it in stereo. You could do half stereo for this. That'll be fine. I'm outputting line level, phase is normal, and that is about it. It's pretty simple, but what I like about it is versatile enough where I already have this layout together. I have very versatile amp tones, so I can just quickly select what tone I and my student need and start working at the task at hand. If you want to check out this preset for yourself, then you can head over to my Patreon. I'm going to put it up there. And of course, if you do want to download some of my favorite tones for free for yourself, head over to matthewdale.com/blocks. I'll see you in the next video.